Welcome back to Rhythm Game Talk Design, where we complain about why it's bad to change the tempo in the middle of a song without telegraphing. This is a follow-up video on the topic of what makes a good rhythm game. Last time we talked about what differentiates a strong concept from a cheap gimmick, the importance of note flow in charting, and the hidden design and benefit of performative play. Now, if you were scratching your head during the entire previous sentence, make sure you watch that video before continuing this one. Otherwise, you might end up scratching your head with both hands. So we left off on the topic of performative play, the idea of designing mechanics like scoring systems in such a way to encourage players looking impressive while they play at a high skill level. And that couldn't be possible without the games accommodating for a high difficulty ceiling, which conveniently brings me to my next topic. Rhythm games are kind of notorious for being difficult, but they have a good reason to do so. Naturally, players will go up in skill over time, and you don't want them to run out of content to keep them engaged. That's how you end up with difficulty inflation, when developers misjudge the difficulty ceiling they should aim for. However, high difficulty ceilings don't mean inaccessible, which is an important distinction. The rule of thumb is that you should aim for as much depth as you can get out of as little complexity as possible. For example, you don't need a lot of buttons to create difficulty. Rhythm Doctor, Thumper, and Rhythm Heaven are all rhythm games with minimal input of 1 or 2 buttons at most, and they manage to subvert players' expectation and add in difficulty without being this. Now, high difficulty ceilings can be achieved in various ways. For example, there is difficulty in sight reading, which relates to telegraphing notes and how easily the player can see what's coming up. And then there's difficulty in control, which is dictated by how the player actually interacts with the game. The fastest way to make a song more difficult on both of those fronts is simply adding more notes, increasing the chart density in the process, which might not be the best thing to do every time. Instead, both of these types of difficulty should be accounted for individually. The sight reading difficulty relates to how predictable your visuals are, or how much you're subverting the player's expectation. A well-telegraphed note will be visible on screen for enough time so the player can predict its movement as it approaches the judgment line. Someone new to rhythm games is likely to keep focusing on the judgment line itself, while more advanced players will keep their eyes glued to the area where the notes show up. Sometimes games can mess with that in ways that feel like artificial difficulty, like what is known as soufflan, the act of changing the tempo in the middle of the song without any telegraphing. I absolutely hate it when games do that, but if you want a good example of messing with a player's head, go and play the second boss in Rhythm Doctor. And I mean play it, don't look it up on YouTube. Hafiz Asman, the designer of Rhythm Doctor, said that the idea of subverting the player's expectation to that degree came from sight-reading tournaments. These are gatherings where a handful of community members create charts specifically designed to mess with the players in creative ways. And the tournament participants compete on these charts with no practice beforehand, and they take things to a whole new level. Coincidentally, some of these tournaments are organized by Taro Nuke himself, who later went on to work with a 7-Beat Games team. But this is such a deep rabbit hole that I might just make an entire separate video about it later on. Now, going back to the other type of difficulty, which is the control type. This comes from things like timing windows. In traditional highway rhythm games, each note has a range of hitboxes. When the player input is detected, the game checks which part of the hitbox is touching the judgment line and awards the player with the appropriate score. These hitboxes are usually broken down into sections like perfect, good, bad, and so on, and the value is obviously higher as the center of the note is closer to the judgment line. But there are also other variables, like determining how far off the note has to be for the game to break the ongoing combo. If you make your game too forgiving, you end up in a similar situation to Spin Rhythm XD, where the timing windows were so lenient that achieving the highest possible score on a song wasn't that difficult. This resulted in leaderboards being flooded by players with the exact same score, and it was no longer a matter of how well you play, but how fast you get up on that leaderboard. On the other hand, games like DDR and In the Groove have very tight timing windows, making it very challenging to get the highest possible score on any song at the cost of being less inviting for novice players. The tricky part is finding the balance between those two extremes, and whether you find it or not, you should make sure you account for proper feedback based on the player's performance. I suggest everyone should take a page out of the Rhythm Heaven book and tell the player exactly what they can improve on at the end of each song. There are many subsections to these two categories that could be used in effective ways to raise the difficulty ceiling of your game. There are limitations though, like how household rhythm games are limited to judging performance based on timing alone, since they deal with binary inputs like a key press or a mouse click. On the other hand, VR games have the freedom of taking multiple variables into consideration, like the previously mentioned cut angle in Beat Saber. But even with binary inputs, you could get creative and maybe consider intentional asymmetry in your timing windows. Just Google rhythm game timing windows and you will find a lot of useful information out there. You could also derive difficulty from your charting by playing around with concepts like beat syncopation or using unusual time signatures. And if you want to lower the chances of difficulty inflation, you could also implement additional modifiers like song speedups or invisible notes for those extra few masochistic players, just in case. The beautiful thing is that if you implement difficulty depth into your game design, players will adapt as they go up the skill curve and come up with new ways to overcome problems, like the hammer-ons and alt-strumming in Guitar Hero, follow-through and wrist locking in Beat Saber, or playing OSU on a tablet. And I only made up one of those. But you have to be careful how much time you spend on difficulty design, because without a proper community and player-generated content, your players will quickly run out of content to play. So let's talk about that. Household rhythm games like OSU are over a decade old, while StepMania is almost of legal drinking age. And the only reason they are still around and popular is due to their very strong communities. Developers can only support their games for so long, with most rhythm games' lifespan being tied directly to their ongoing support in the form of new song packs and regular updates. Most closed rhythm games that don't allow for content creation don't survive that long, with the exception being games like Rock Band, developed by Harmonix. This is a team consisting of people with decades of experience in the rhythm game genre, with an enormous catalog of song licenses, which results in their game benefiting off of 14 years of DLCs and still going. When the Guitar Hero IP died and players were left with plastic guitars gathering dust, Ryan Foster saw an opportunity and created Clone Hero. This was a community-friendly version of Guitar Hero that allowed for modding and custom chart creation by their players, giving those dusty plastic guitars a new home. StepMania did the same thing to DDR, just like OSU did the same thing for Elite Beat Agents. So if you don't allow for content creation in your game, someone else will probably account for that in another game. It seems that a rhythm game's lifespan is directly linked to how open it is to its community. And my point is, every rhythm game should release with a solid selection of songs on day one, quickly followed by an ongoing stream of content updates. However, regardless of how big your development team is, it's unlikely that you can keep up with what a dedicated community can put out with the right tools. So that's why you should account for modding and well-designed level editors in order to encourage your community to create content. A polished level editor with a good UI, live charting features, and node quantization capabilities goes a long way. And who knows, maybe your game will become popular after someone makes a meme chart in your game and a video of it goes viral online.
Oh my god, the game can't even load these notes!
Poulsen is one of those examples of what not to do. It was a game very similar to DDR, released on Steam without any modding or content creation support. And this led to it being ignored by the rhythm gaming community because StepMania is already that but with modding, which makes it better in literally every way. And not only that, but StepMania, just like OSU, took it a step further and released its code to be used in an open source manner by anyone who wants to do so. This resulted in entire spin-offs with their own arcade cabinets, growing the rhythm game community even further. Another example of this is Rhythm Doctor, which was released in early access with content creation tools, and as a result of that, a decent amount of the charts in the game were created by community members that ended up working with the development team. So having a lot of content is crucial for a rhythm game, but how that content is being delivered to the player is an equally important matter that must not be ignored. Given their initial arcade origin, rhythm game cabinets allowed players to select any song they wanted to play at any difficulty. This was basically the open world equivalent of not holding your hand so you can rush Ganon's castle only to get wrecked and go back to bullying sleeping bokoblins. When those rhythm games started entering the household market through consoles, they needed to adapt to the business model of you only pay once for your game and you own it forever. So as a result, they introduced progression systems where you gradually unlock more songs as you play. This is something still used nowadays in the form of a career or a story mode, but more often than not, it's being ignored by a majority of players given that it's basically a predefined playlist of songs that starts out too easy with little to no rewards motivating you to push through it. It lacks that flow we've talked about in the first video.
I feel alone, feel at home, feel like nothing is true.
Now, in the hopes of creating a sustainable business model, some developers opt into a pay for more content system, where song packs are released regularly behind a paywall. Other games try to put a little bit more focus on player agency by rewarding them with in-game currency that can be used to unlock more songs. What I would like to encourage is games that try new things with their progression systems, like this specific Taiko game, whose subtitle I won't even attempt to pronounce. You get to play songs like in any other rhythm game, but if you perform well, at the end of the song you are rewarded with a little pet that you can take home and take care of them, like a Tamagotchi, adding a layer of collectibles on top of the rhythm gameplay, which is absolutely adorable. Or another example of getting creative with a progression system is Sound Voltex, where you can fight boss songs. I had a call with Tokaku, a well-known rhythm game player who makes regular YouTube videos on this topic, so I'll let her describe this one.
They are called boss songs. If you wanted to unlock a song, you had to fight this boss. You don't actually fight them. They had some system of okay, you play these 3 songs and then you can damage this HP, and that HP is unlocking another song.
So if you're designing a rhythm game, I would encourage you to get creative with your progression system and keep the player's agency in mind while not gating them too much. However, before I wrap up this series, I would like to touch on one last very important topic. From gimmicks to progression systems, a majority of rhythm game design elements come from their birth in the arcade environment. Their overall flashy presentation and user interfaces are no exceptions to that. And this was a decision out of necessity in order to stand out in a very loud environment, where every flashy arcade cabinet is competing for the attention of potential players. But sadly, those features don't tend to go hand in hand with accessibility. So luckily, since most popular games like OSU and StepMania are open source, they have built a tradition of being incredibly customizable. For example, allowing players to turn off flashy animated backgrounds during gameplay, or even changing the scroll direction of the notes. And you might not realize the significance of such options, because Taiko games force you into horizontal scrolling without giving you the option to change that, which makes gameplay very difficult on common household 60Hz screens due to screen tearing. And that's why I'd like to adopt the mentality of more customization is better. For example, both OSU and StepMania allow players to replace their textures, completely changing the appearance of the game through skins. So naturally, the community created colorblind friendly skins, which encouraged other games like Archaea to implement that feature by default. This allows for accessibility even at the highly competitive levels, where players use OSU skins that remove that perfect feedback text, which has a tendency of covering a significant portion of your screen when you play densely charted songs.
Oh yeah! That's what I'm talking about!
And the reason why this is so important is because unlike other games, players will end up in the main menu of a rhythm game after every song, which is roughly every 2 minutes. And that's why you want menu navigation to be intuitive. unlike DDR, where if you want to change the song speed on the arcade version, you have to get off the dance pad and go to the cabinet's pin pad, where you normally input your account pin, and press 9 to open the options menu. Please don't do that. Instead, be more like Rhythm Heaven, where the song selection screen is laid out in a grid pattern where you literally work your way up each column to reach the final remix song of each chapter. So the song selection screen doubles as a progress bar, which is very clever and intuitive. However, there is a tricky conundrum here when it comes to accessibility, because rhythm games are competitive in nature. No one really plays rhythm games for the story, as the main focus tends to be competing against friends or other players on a leaderboard, which means that accessibility usually comes at the cost of competition. Some games tackle this by allowing players to decrease the difficulty levels through modifiers, such as slower songs or no-fail modes, that still allow you to submit your score to the leaderboards, with the caveat that each modifier affects your score. If your core game design is non-competitive, like Rhythm Doctor, you could also allow players to adjust the note timing windows for a better experience, going as far as allowing for infinite error margins. Hafiz is actually trying to push accessibility even further and aims to make Rhythm Doctor the first blind-friendly rhythm game by the time it comes out of early access, which would be an impressive achievement. So take those examples as proof of the power of opening your game up to its community and making it accessible both from a gameplay perspective but also content creation wise. There are also other aspects that contribute significantly to a rhythm game's success, such as practice modes, creative calibration mechanics, and anti-mashing systems, to name a few. And even though the best rhythm games out there seem to check most boxes when it comes to these categories, they are by no means a checklist, but merely a guide, so make use of them as you see fit. So after my research and several calls with multiple people closely related to rhythm games, I reached the conclusion that a good rhythm game must have a good hook, so it encourages players to give it a try. And through gameplay design, it should keep players engaged while also making the highly skilled ones look good doing so. It should have a high enough difficulty ceiling to accommodate for skill mastery, and it should embrace its community through the encouragement of content creation. All of this while giving its players something to look forward to, while not alienating those who are just starting out on their journey of becoming rhythm game masters. Oh, and one final thing, and this should go without saying, but since we're talking rhythm, you have to absolutely make sure that your game has a banger soundtrack. And there we go, 34 minutes of me talking about rhythm game design. Took me over 2 months to finish this project, and I'm considering merging these two parts into one longer video later on if you guys think it makes sense. Until then, I'll be over in the Discord channel that you're currently seeing in the background, and you can join the ongoing conversation there over at the link in the description below. Oh, and please don't forget to feed the little YouTube robots with the shiny buttons around the video. Now, until the next upload, these little robots think you're going to enjoy these two specific videos. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the comments.